you think latency will always be a problem?
Yeah, so the latency challenge, I'll call it, is throughout the entire spectrum of UAS, and I don't mean spectrum from a communication standpoint. So the latency issues that have to do with the communication link, and it has to do with how an off-board pilot visualizes what's going on and how the thought process they go through, which is very different than being actually on the airplane. And even in terms of how a pilot can in an airplane can feel if there's some icing with the buffeting wings, or if you're starting to stall, well, you don't get that same feel. So there's some latency issues that are associated with that. All of those latency issues are challenges that have to be dealt with. And as part of looking at the entire picture of an equivalent or a target level of safety, those have to be factored in. So whether communication latencies or just mental latencies, between having an air traffic controller tell a pilot to turn and a pilot somewhere remotely turning, and then whether or not that happens at the same latency as actually if the pilot were in the cockpit. All those things have to be looked at. So latency will continue to be a challenge for the U.S. community to be able to factor into that whole safety equation. You won't be able to necessarily solve all of the latency issues, but you may be able to compensate for them in some other way, either through technology or through policy or procedures. So latency is a big issue. It'll continue to be a big issue. It certainly is an issue on the communication side, but it's not, in terms of the timing, we don't think it's that significant. I mean, you're talking about other than takeoff and landing, it's definitely not significant. But even on takeoff and landing, you've got very little amount of latency that's built into the communication system.
A successful autonomous system where you could still have a human operator on the ground, who would be overseeing and there for more emergency or contingency situations. But that with an autonomous system, you would still have redundancy with that human. Just like you said with public transportation, people want to see a person in control. I would still feel safe knowing that there's a human operator on the ground, even if they were overseeing multiple vehicles flying around. Just like an air traffic controller is watching multiple aircraft, which is a multitasking operation. Does it seem feasible that could be a result in the future?
Sure. So, so you raise a couple different things. One is that the redundancy part is one of the ways to help alleviate the challenges of latency. So the more redundant systems you have, the less latency you're going to have, et cetera. But so you went down another path, and it brings back thoughts of when the FAA and others thought about completely automating air traffic control and just having a controller there in the case of emergency. Part of the complication there, and you do see it in cases where you have a fully autonomous train and now you've got an operator who has to take over in an emergency, is that you don't have the training and background and the ability to on the fly take over in an emergency situation because you've lost some of that experience level. So if we think of a system that is fully autonomous with just a pilot sitting there in case of emergency, you have to look at some of the issues that would be associated with training and how you keep them current, and it's a big issue, and it's why we're probably not going to see a fully automated air transportation system for a long time. And so we're probably, to the extent that you're going to have a pilot doing multiple vehicles, I think is very reasonable, and there's a lot of research going on there, and that's certainly reasonable. But to have the pilot's only role as taking over in the case of emergency, that's a lot more complicated. And I don't think that there's any evidence to say that that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think that's true on the pilot side, it's true on the air traffic controller side. The concern is that the situation becomes so complex that the automation can't figure it out, and now you hand it over to the human. It's sort of usually the other way around. So if the human is there to only take over in the case of an emergency, then that's somewhat of a problem in my mind, and I think in the minds of many.